the stones that shouldn't exist. High on the Bolivian Altiplano, the wind is the first thing you notice. It comes across the plain like an ancient memory, thin from altitude, cold enough to sharpen thought. Then your eyes adjust, and the second thing you notice is that the landscape seems to have been interrupted by a geometry that doesn't belong to weather or chance. Rectangles, perfect angles, faces of stone so flat the light skims off them. Puma Punku sits there, broken and undeniable, like the last page torn from a book that no one remembers how to read. Nothing about the place fits the expectations we have for antiquity. The blocks are immense and stubbornly precise, carved from andesite and red sandstone, dragged from quarries miles away, lifted and placed without cranes or wheels or draft animals warm enough to survive this thin air. You can say the words, ropes, ramps, manpower, because those are the words we've inherited. But if you stand in front of these stones long enough, the words begin to feel like excuses. The edges are too clean, the surfaces too flat, the alignments too exact to be explained away by effort alone. Walk among the fragments and you see it everywhere. Recesses and channels cut into faces like the negative of a missing component. Internal right angles so crisp that even modern stonemasons pause. Holes that run straight and uniform as if drilled by a guided bit, not pecked by hand. The famous H blocks, scattered like letters from some shattered alphabet, share measurements to a tolerance that suggests a common template. Place a square against their corners, and the square blushes at its own imprecision. The official story says the Tiwanaku civilization built this complex between the 6th and 10th centuries of our era, when bronze was valuable and iron was a rumor. According to the timeline in the museum, this was a ritual platform, a sacred precinct of a thriving highland culture. That may be true in part. The Tiwanaku left their fingerprints across the plateau. But the stones of Puma Punku carry a different kind of fingerprint. Industrial logic, modular repetition, an obsession with symmetry that feels less like art and more like engineering. It is reasonable to credit the local culture. It is harder to credit copper chisels for work that humbles steel. The altitude makes everything harder. Your lungs fill more slowly. Your thoughts move in deliberate steps. Now imagine teams of workers at nearly 13,000 feet, carving a rock that eats tools, hauling blocks that outweigh elephants, placing them with gaps so tight you cannot slide a razor blade between faces. Imagine doing this with seasonal rains, freezing nights, and no trees for scaffold or leverage. If the mind resists the picture, it is not because humans lack ingenuity. It is because the claim of ordinary means has to bridge a distance that grows wider the more carefully you look. This is the paradox of Puma Punku. The closer you come to it, the farther away it moves from the explanations you brought. Lean in to study a cut and find parallel striations that look like the signature of abrasion at speed. Trace a recess and discover that its depth is consistent across the piece to a degree that mocks fatigue and chance. Follow a line from one block to another and realize they were conceived not as isolated efforts, but as members of a system. Even the damage seems to describe a moment of violence rather than a long surrender to time. Stones tossed and flipped as if by a force that arrived all at once. What purpose could require this kind of perfection? A temple can be beautiful while remaining flexible. Ritual tolerates irregularity. The precision here suggests interchangeability and load, the vocabulary of parts. One can imagine the original complex not as walls in the way we think of walls, but as frames and couplers, ligaments and sockets. The site feels less like an edifice and more like a machine frozen mid-assembly, its power cut, its pieces strewn, its meaning buried under the rubble of an event that ended it. Skeptics are right about one thing. People did this. The blocks did not cut themselves. The grooves did not appear by accident. But there are two ways to honor human capability. One is to defend the narrow corridor of what we currently believe people could do with the tools we've cataloged. The other is to allow the stones to broaden that corridor, to let evidence change our confidence about the past. The first protects textbooks. The second serves truth. Consider the material. Andesite is not gentle. It is dense, fine-grained, and unforgiving beneath a soft tool. Today, we tame it with diamond blades, cooling water, and guided machines. At Puma Punku, large faces look burnished. Corners intersect internally with improbable crispness, and repeating features carry the sameness of a jig or indexer. If you say this is the result of patience alone, you also need to explain why ordinary patience across hundreds of pieces happen to converge on tolerances we normally achieve with fixtures and metrics. If you say it's luck, then luck here has a suspiciously consistent hand. There are moments when the stones feel almost pedagogical, as if they were left to force a question rather than to display an answer. You bend over a channel that widens by the same amount every few inches, and you wonder about flow, of water, of air, of something else whose behavior in stone requires smooth transitions and measurable repeatability. You run your fingers along a recess and think about fasteners and couplings, about the need to seat a piece the same way every time so the system behaves predictably under load. You look out over the plateau and imagine a structure you cannot see, a design whose logic still whispers through the shards. Myths breathe in this altitude. The Aymara say the first light rose here, and that a being came from the waters of Titicaca to teach the arts of building and the measure of the sky. In such air, it is easy to hear that as poetry. It is also easy, among these blocks, to wonder whether memory sometimes survives as story when it cannot survive as plan. If knowledge is lost and then rediscovered, the interval becomes filled with names for what remains: gods, giants, shining ones. Not because people are simple, but because memory protects what meaning it can. The site does not argue for aliens or for fantasies dressed in steel. It argues, stubbornly and with evidence carved into volcanic rock, that someone knew more than we are comfortable assigning to this time and place. Perhaps that someone was a lineage of local minds accumulated over centuries. Perhaps it was a smaller group inheriting an older blueprint. Perhaps it was simply a different way of seeing that refused to separate mathematics from ritual, or utility from beauty. Whatever the case, the stones compress possibility into a single demand. Take me seriously on my own terms. Stand still long enough and the wind becomes a metronome. Shadows slide along faces with the slow certainty of celestial mechanics. You start to notice alignments, lines that point to where the sun rises on particular days, edges that sit in conversation with mountains, arrangements that make sense if the sky is a partner rather than a backdrop. It is one thing to worship the sun. It is another to design in a way that treats time as a dimension of the structure. Puma Punku hints at the latter. Of course, there are counter-arguments, and they deserve airtime. Abrasive sand under labor and patience can achieve wonders. Copper is soft, but with repeated sharpening and leverage, it can score and dress even stubborn stone. Teams working with sleds and rollers can move absurd loads. If the goal is simply to say, possible, these points succeed. But possible is a low bar compared to what the site presents. Repeatable tolerances, mirrored features, interchangeable modules, consistency at a scale that resists the entropy of human fatigue. The conversation is not about whether a single cut could be made well. It is about why so many were made this well in patterns that imply an underlying system. Maybe the most honest beginning is humility. We do not have the full story. We have stones that should not exist in the way they exist, sitting in a place that adds difficulty, wrapped in a timeline that strains under their demands. The humility does not weaken curiosity, it fortifies it. If you allow yourself to say, I don't know, the site opens rather than closes. Questions proliferate in the best way. What measurement system governed these pieces? Why do certain distances echo numbers we also find in faraway monuments? What role did resonance play, if any, in shaping or stabilizing the structure? Is there a relationship between the quartz in the stone and the insistence on tight interfaces? Are we looking at architecture, infrastructure, or something that sits between the two? The ground itself seems complicit. There are hints, Too many to dismiss, and not enough to conclude, that what we see above may be the smallest fraction of what existed. The visible fragments become a kind of typography for the invisible, like letters suggesting whole words buried beneath the dust. If that is so, then the surface already tells a powerful story. Design married to endurance, intention forced to outlive function, precision surviving the loss of purpose. There is a moment every visitor earns when awe softens into responsibility. The spectacle gives way to a quieter pact. If the past could make something like this, then what do we owe it in return? Not worship, not projection, but a careful attention that refuses to flatten evidence into comfort. Puma Punku is not a riddle to be solved in an afternoon. It is a standard. It asks whether our explanations honor the stubborn facts in front of us, or whether they protect the inertia of what we thought we knew. In that sense, the ruins are not only about the people who built them, they are about us. What do we do when the world places in our hands a piece that doesn't fit the puzzle on the box? Do we shave the piece until it fits and call the job finished? Or do we admit the picture on the box may be incomplete and enlarge the frame until the piece belongs? Puma Punku will not answer on command. It will not tell you who, when, or how in a voice loud enough to drown disagreement. What it will do, relentlessly, is refuse poor answers. It will stand in the thin air and show you planes and angles and joins that demand respect. It will insist that someone once brought together mathematics, material, and meaning in a way that does not embarrass the phrase lost knowledge. It will make you breathe deeper. It will make you look closer. It will make you uncomfortable in the way all real learning does. And if you leave without certainty, but with sharper questions and a wider sense of what human beings might have been and might still be, then the stones have done their work. Because this is not only a story about the past, it is a story about what it takes to build something that instructs the future simply by surviving it. Here, on a high plain where light is an instrument and wind edits every sound to its essentials, the stones that shouldn't exist continue to insist on themselves. What comes next is not safer. The deeper you go, the more the site resists ordinary categories. The blocks begin to arrange themselves into patterns, and the patterns into logic, and the logic into the skeleton of a technology whose nouns we no longer own. That is the promise and the threat of Puma Punku. It invites you to stop pretending that mystery is a weakness. It dares you to believe that the most responsible answer to an impossible stone is not denial, but attention. And when you accept that dare, the plateau feels different. The wind becomes a voice. The shadows become diagrams. The ruins stop being ruins and turn into a kind of curriculum. If the first duty of a civilization is to remember, then these stones are our teachers. They remember with a patience we have not earned. They remember without bitterness. They remember without footnotes. They remember with planes and lines and tolerances that ask us, simply, to meet them where they are, exact, stubborn, and very much alive. The forgotten blueprint walk, far enough from the tourist trail, past the scattered stones where the guide's voices fade, and the pattern of Puma Punku begins to emerge from the ground like a memory reassembling itself. From a distance, it looks random, the chaos of collapse. But viewed from above or mapped with modern scanning, order returns. Every block follows proportions that belong to the same geometric family. Each angle repeats. Each recess aligns. The randomness is only on the surface. Beneath it lives a design as deliberate as any circuit. Archaeologists describe the complex as part of the Tiwanaku civilization, a culture that flourished here more than a millennium ago. They say it was a temple platform, a sacred space where rituals connected the people to the cosmos. And maybe that's true, but even the most faithful reading of that story leaves questions scattered like the stones themselves. For if it was a temple, why the precision of an engineer instead of the symbolism of an artist? Why this relentless repetition of modules, each identical, as if meant for mass assembly? Why cuts so fine that the joints behave like the seams of machined parts? Digital modeling has allowed researchers to reconstruct what the site might once have been. When they fit the blocks together in three-dimensional space, they do not form random walls, but an interlocking grid. The joints distribute weight evenly. The recesses act as connectors. It is as if the builders designed a structure that could be taken apart and rebuilt, scaled up or down according to need. In modern language, we would call this modular architecture. In the language of the ancients, it might have been the geometry of permanence, a way to build that could survive both time and flood. The measurements tell their own story. Ratios of 1 to 3, 2 to 5, squares within rectangles, recurring distances that echo the golden mean. The same harmonies that govern music seem to govern this architecture. The blocks appear to have been tuned, not metaphorically, but literally. Each one carries a rhythm, a repeating frequency of proportion. If this sounds mystical, remember that modern physics describes the universe itself as vibration, matter, energy, thought, all waves of different lengths. Perhaps the builders of Puma Punku knew that long before we wrote the equations. Imagine them standing here under a colder sky, reading the heavens as one reads a manual. The constellations above the Altiplano shift slowly with the precession of the Earth, but the builders caught their moment perfectly. The alignment of the stones matches the rising of certain stars as they appeared not 1,000 years ago, but closer to 12,000, long before the Tiwanaku were known to exist. That detail has troubled archaeologists for decades. Either the alignments were coincidence, or the design was inherited from a time long before history began to count itself. The blocks themselves hint at inheritance. Some are carved from red sandstone, relatively soft, and others from hard, volcanic andesite. The red stones seem to have been added later, repairs or embellishments on an older core. It's as if generations worked on this place, some remembering the pattern, others only imitating it. The further back you go in the layering of construction, the finer the workmanship becomes. Progress here moves backward. The oldest stones are the most perfect. The newest are the least precise. Civilization, in this narrative, didn't climb upward. It descended. If Puma Punku was inherited, what happened to the civilization that first conceived it? Myths tell of floods, of mountains sinking into lakes, of gods who fled across the sea. Science echoes those myths now with data. The Younger Dryas, a global cataclysm 12,000 years ago, a time when ice sheets melted, oceans rose, and climates turned violent. If a civilization thrived before that storm, its ruins would lie scattered across the world, buried under sediment, forgotten. The Andean Plateau could be one of its last breaths above the waterline. Stand in the center of the ruin at noon, when the sun is directly overhead. The shadows retreat into the cuts, tracing dark lines along grooves that connect block to block like wiring. You begin to understand why so many call this place a machine. Every surface interacts with light and sound. The wind moves through the channels and produces tones that seem too deliberate to be accident. Engineers who've measured them claim they resonate at harmonic frequencies, the kind used in acoustic levitation experiments. It's almost as if the stones were meant to sing. If so, then the builders may have known a truth we are just rediscovering, that sound shapes matter. In laboratories today, scientists use vibration to move particles, to lift objects, even to carve patterns into sand that mimic sacred geometry. At Puma Punku, the same principle might have scaled upward. The grooves, the angles, the repeating measurements, all could be the instructions for resonance. Not a tool, but a score. Not architecture, but frozen music. And yet, despite its complexity, the place carries an elegance that modern engineers envy. No wires, no machines, no visible mechanisms, only form. Whatever technology operated here was inseparable from art. The builders didn't add beauty to utility. They built beauty as utility. Their science was aesthetic. Their mathematics, spiritual. That integration may be the most alien thing about them. Not their tools, but their mindset. Puma Punku makes us confront how narrow our idea of progress really is. We imagine civilization as a ladder, each rung a new invention leading upward. But what if knowledge moves in circles instead? What if the ancients reached a kind of harmony, not with engines and electricity, but with the planet itself, and then lost it in the storm of time? The stones suggest memory rather than invention. They whisper that we have been advanced before. When you step back from the scattered blocks, the pattern resolves again into silence. The wind fills the cuts like breath moving through flutes. The site feels unfinished, and maybe that's the point. It is both complete and broken, a lesson half erased but still legible to anyone who listens closely enough. Every groove and joint, every ratio and alignment carries the same message. Precision is not the opposite of mystery, it is its language. The official explanations will continue to shrink Puma Punku into a comfortable corner of history, but the stones refuse to comply. They stand in the open, unbothered by the limits of our imagination, waiting for us to grow into the questions they left behind. And until we do, the blueprint remains half buried, not only in the soil of Bolivia, but in the collective amnesia of our species, echoes of a lost civilization. Long before written language, before the first empire carved its stories into clay, memory lived in stone and myth. Across the Andes, those memories endure like ghosts that refuse to fade. The people who still walk this high land speak of Viracocha, the luminous one, the bringer of order after chaos, the god who came from the waters of Lake Titicaca when darkness had swallowed the world. He shaped men from clay, taught them to build, taught them to look to the sky for meaning. When his work was done, he vanished to the west, promising to return in the time of the next sun. To the Aymara, Viracocha was not imagination, he was memory. And the place where he began his creation was here, near Tiwanaku, near Puma Punku. The stones were said to have answered his command, moving themselves into place at the sound of his voice. For centuries, scholars heard that legend and smiled. A poetic way, they thought, of explaining the impossible craftsmanship of the ruins. But as the details of the site became clearer under modern study, the myth started to sound less like fantasy and more like recollection. Stones that move by sound, matter shaped by vibration. It reads like metaphor until you measure the precision of Puma Punku and find resonance where you expected only rock. These stories of divine builders are not unique to the Andes. They appear everywhere the earth remembers catastrophe. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki descended from the heavens to raise the cities of men. In Egypt, Thoth and Osiris brought architecture and writing. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl emerged from the eastern sea to teach calendars and building. Different names, different continents. The same pattern, knowledge descending after the flood. The storytellers of antiquity might have been describing not gods, but survivors, remnants of a civilization old enough to have witnessed the end of the last ice age and the beginning of ours. Archaeologists resist such suggestions because they dissolve the timeline that holds our history together. Yet geology itself now admits that something immense happened around 12,800 years ago. A planetary disaster that melted glaciers, drowned coastlines, and erased the early record of humanity. The Younger Dryas was a wound deep enough to end an age. In its aftermath, it is entirely plausible that scattered groups carried fragments of lost knowledge into the new world that emerged from the flood. Perhaps Viracocha was one of those fragments, a name given to the memory of teachers who had walked among ruins older than myth. Standing amid the broken stones, you can almost feel the echo of that age. The precision of Puma Punku is not primitive experimentation, it is refinement. Whoever built it was not discovering geometry, they were applying it. They knew already that symmetry produces strength, that resonance stabilizes, that harmony can be engineered. These are not instincts of a people at the beginning of knowledge, but of a people at its maturity. It is tempting to imagine them as something other than human, divine, alien, supernatural. But perhaps the more challenging idea is that they were human after all, our ancestors, just separated from us by cataclysm and time, a previous humanity that reached a level of understanding that allowed them to weave art, science, and cosmology into a single language. If that language survived anywhere, it is in the geometry of their monuments. When light falls across the stones at dawn, shadows form patterns like text, each groove casting a precise shape that shifts minute by minute. Researchers have mapped these shadows and discovered that they mark solstices, equinoxes, and lunar extremes, a calendar not written in words but encoded in architecture. The site tells time through illumination, as if its builders wanted the sky itself to be the author of its message. This union of stone and star was once common. The same harmony binds Stonehenge to the sun, Giza to Orion, Angkor Wat to Draco. Puma Punku stands among those global siblings, another verse in the Song of Lost Order, and yet its silence is complete. No inscriptions, no hieroglyphs, no surviving names. The builders left nothing that speaks directly, only the perfection of their work. Perhaps they didn't need writing. Perhaps the structure itself was the language, the stones the alphabet, and the resonance of form their voice. When words decay, geometry remains. Ratios do not require translation. What they built may have been more than ceremonial. Some researchers believe that Tiwanaku and Puma Punku together formed a kind of spiritual machine, an interface between humanity and the cosmos. The orientation of the temples, the magnetism of the stones, and the flowing water channels beneath them suggest a system designed to interact with natural forces. It was as if they sought to make the earth itself sing in harmony with the heavens. If you lived in a world before electricity but sensitive to the subtle powers of vibration, you might not call it technology. You might call it divinity. It's here that science and myth touch fingers. The ancients told of gods who sang mountains into obedience. Physics tells us that frequency can shape matter. Both statements may be true in their own way. The first describes experience, the second describes mechanism. Together they outline the same mystery, that sound, thought, and structure are not separate. They are facets of the same act of creation. And so, as the wind threads through the hollow grooves of the ruins, it carries more than air. It carries the echo of that act, the voice of a civilization that spoke fluently with the world around it. Each gust becomes a syllable, each vibration a word. And though we no longer understand the language, the feeling of it remains: awe, loss, recognition. It may be that we are the descendants of those who survived the last fall, that we have walked in circles through ages of remembering and forgetting. If that is true, then Puma Punku is not an alien visitation or a miracle out of place. It is a reminder, a surviving fragment of an older conversation between humanity and the cosmos. A conversation that ended not because we stopped talking, but because we stopped listening. What remains is the echo, waiting for ears patient enough to hear it again. The weight of the impossible walk slowly across the plateau and the size of the stones begins to play tricks on your sense of proportion. Up close, they seem manageable. You can trace the edge of a block, rest your hand in the recess of a cut. Step back, and the illusion collapses. The nearest piece weighs 40 tons, the next perhaps twice that, the largest more than 100. They lie scattered as if flung by the hand of a giant, half buried in the cold soil. The thought arrives unbidden: how did they move this? The official story is simple. They didn't have beasts of burden strong enough to pull such weight, but they had people, thousands of them, hauling on ropes, dragging on sledges, building earthen ramps. It's a picture easy to imagine when you read it in a textbook. It becomes less easy when you stand here at nearly 13,000 feet, where oxygen thins and even walking feels like work. The nearest quarry for the red sandstone is 6 miles away, for the andesite 10. The path between is uneven, steep, and at times impassable even with modern vehicles. Archaeologists propose that the builders rolled the stones on logs, but the Altiplano has never been rich in trees. They suggest reed sleds and water-lubricated clay, but the plateau is mostly dry. Engineers who have tried to replicate the feat with experimental teams have managed to move blocks weighing 20 tons over short distances and flat ground. None have come close to reproducing the movement of a 100-ton monolith up this altitude. And even if they could, moving is only half the puzzle. The real mystery is placement. At Puma Punku, the largest blocks are not just moved. They are positioned with tolerances, measured in fractions of an inch. To lift and set them would require a system of leverage and control beyond ropes and manpower. There are no scratches, no drag marks, no evidence of trial and error. Each block was lowered into place, as if guided by invisible precision. Some suggest that the stones were floated on water when the region was wetter, gliding along channels like barges, but even that theory falters at the final elevation. How do you lift such a mass from water to its resting height without leaving traces of the process? There are no discarded ramps, no leftover scaffolds, no tool debris buried nearby. The ground offers only the stones themselves, as if they materialized fully formed. Others point toward a more speculative answer, that the builders harnessed forces we have only begun to rediscover: sound, magnetism, resonance. The idea sounds fanciful until you remember how much of modern engineering depends on frequency. Ultrasonic vibration cuts, levitates, and fuses. Resonance can reduce friction and distribute load. In the laboratories of today, these principles move objects without physical contact. Scale that knowledge upward, and the myth of the singing stones no longer sounds impossible. Even if we refuse the notion of lost technology, the numbers alone demand awe. The energy required to move a single block that size with the means we know would equal the output of an industrial generator running for hours. Multiply that by hundreds of stones, and you begin to understand that Puma Punku represents not only craftsmanship, but the concentrated will of a civilization. However they did it, they planned with intent and patience on a scale that our age rarely attempts. There's another question. Why here? The plateau is hostile, freezing nights, blazing days, a landscape of salt and silence. If the purpose was ceremonial, there were easier places to build. Yet they chose this altitude, this harshness, as if proximity to the sky mattered more than comfort. The site aligns not with rivers or trade routes, but with the heavens. Lines drawn through the remaining foundations point toward solstice sunrises, to the Milky Way, to constellations that framed their mythology. The stones were meant to speak to the stars, and maybe to whatever once came from them. The more you look, the more the pattern of collapse begins to tell its own story. The blocks are not eroded in place. They are broken and scattered as if by force. Some are flipped upside down. Others lie far from their original foundations. The damage suggests not centuries of decay, but a single moment of destruction. Geologists who have studied the fractures find that the stones show micro cracks consistent with rapid shock, an event sudden enough to shatter rather than crumble. Earthquake, explosion, or something else, the effect was catastrophic. The local legends preserve a version of that memory. They speak of fire from the sky, of a blinding flash that turned the air to glass and left the earth trembling. The gods, they say, grew angry and struck their own creation. Beneath the myth lies an echo of physics, an impact, a discharge, a release of energy beyond measure. There are traces of vitrified stone near the site, surfaces fused by heat so intense it rivals the output of modern furnaces. What could have caused that in a time before metallurgy? Maybe it was a meteor, as scientists sometimes suggest. Maybe it was an experiment gone wrong, as the myths hint. Whatever it was, it ended an era. The stones that once fit together like the teeth of a machine now lie scattered like the debris of an exploded engine. And yet, even broken, they continue to teach. Each surface tells of an attention to material that we have almost forgotten. The builders knew the grain of the stone, the way stress travels through it, the way sound moves along its body. They carved with respect for the atomic nature of matter, the same way we now carve silicon for circuits. The difference is that they did it with a simplicity that has survived 10 millennia of weather. To walk among these fragments is to feel the double weight of human possibility and human loss. We built this, and we forgot how. We stood here once under the same thin sky and shaped the impossible into existence. Then something, disaster, neglect, arrogance, reduced it to ruin. Now we stand again, puzzled by our own inheritance, measuring it with lasers, debating its date, missing its lesson. The lesson might be as simple as humility. The ancients who raised these stones did not think of themselves as primitive, and they were not. They were part of a continuity we keep breaking, a dialogue between intellect and nature. They knew that stone holds memory, that form can carry meaning longer than words. They built for eternity and nearly succeeded. The fact that we are still here asking how is proof of their success. Puma Punku reminds us that civilization is not defined by technology alone, but by the intention behind it. These people understood something we are still relearning, that to master matter, you must first listen to it. They listened to the weight, the resonance, the pulse of the planet. In return, the stones obeyed. When the wind passes through the ruins, it sounds like breath drawn through an instrument, the music of pressure and release. Perhaps that's the closest we'll ever come to hearing the sound that once moved the mountains, not a mythic song from the gods, but the quiet hum of a world that once knew how to speak with itself. The precision enigma. There are ruins that impress because of their scale, and there are ruins that unsettle because of their precision. Puma Punku belongs to the second kind. Its power lies not in height or mass, but in the perfection of detail. Every groove, every bevel, every corner seems to have been executed with intent so exacting that it leaves little room for improvisation. In the heart of these stones lies a language of measurement, a logic that refuses to decay even when the stone itself fractures. The famous H blocks are the clearest example. Dozens of them lie scattered like letters torn from a word whose meaning has been lost. When measured carefully, each H block matches the next with astonishing uniformity. Same width, same height, same recessed depth, same pattern of grooves and slots. This is not random craftsmanship. It is serial production. The builders were not sculptors working by instinct. They were engineers working from design. When scanned digitally, the blocks fit together in virtual space with almost mechanical perfection. The seams align, the grooves match, the recesses interlock in multiple configurations. The pattern is modular, scalable, deliberate. It suggests a mind that thought in systems, not in monuments, a mind that saw architecture not as static form, but as living structure. The ratios inside each block are not arbitrary. Measure them, and you find a rhythm of numbers that recur in sacred architecture around the world. 1-2, 1-1.618, 2-3. These are not decorations. They are the mathematics of stability, proportion, and resonance. The builders understood that geometry is not only beauty, it is physics. The right ratio distributes weight, cancels vibration, harmonizes with the natural frequencies of the material. They built that harmony into stone. Run your hand across the surface of one of these blocks, and the sensation is almost disorienting. It is not rough, not even coarse. It feels closer to glass, polished to a degree that demands more than chiseling. There are no visible tool marks. Under magnification, the surfaces reveal linear striations, consistent with abrasion by high-speed rotation. Copper chisels could not leave such marks. Even hardened steel struggles to cut andesite with that kind of consistency. The only known methods capable of producing such finishes today involve diamond tooling or ultrasonic vibration. Yet this work was supposedly done more than 1,000 years before the first industrial lathe. At several points, narrow drill holes penetrate the stone at uniform depth and diameter. Their walls are perfectly smooth, spiraling slightly, as if made by a rotating bit under steady pressure. In one example, a cylindrical core of stone remains lodged halfway out, like the frozen memory of a process interrupted. No trace of the tool has ever been found. No residue of metal, no discarded fragments, only the evidence of precision. To imagine the craftsman who did this is to confront a contradiction. If he worked by hand, he possessed superhuman steadiness. If he worked by tool, he possessed machinery we cannot find. Either way, the implication is the same. Our map of technological evolution is incomplete. Some have tried to reduce the wonder by exaggerating the patience of ancient workers. They say it is possible to achieve near perfection with enough time and repetition. But patience leaves a pattern: irregularities, fatigue, microscopic asymmetries. The stones of Puma Punku do not carry those signatures. They suggest not just care, but calibration. Every line has purpose. Every cut anticipates connection. This is not the language of improvisation. It is the language of blueprints. There are subtle clues that the builders understood more than just geometry. When sunlight strikes the stones at certain angles, reflections dance across the recessed grooves like pulses of light. The effect is not random. The spacing of these grooves corresponds to harmonic intervals of frequency when translated into sound. It is as if the structure was meant to interact with both light and vibration, a double resonance that bridged the physical and the energetic. To the modern mind, such speculation borders on mysticism. But to the ancient builder, who saw no boundary between physics and spirit, it may have been common sense. Consider the choice of material: andesite and red sandstone. Andesite is dense, with high quartz content, capable of carrying vibration efficiently. Sandstone is softer, resonant, able to amplify sound. In modern terms, one is a conductor, the other a resonator. Combined, they form an acoustic system. If the builders knew how to tune these properties, they might have built structures that interacted with the Earth's natural frequencies, an architecture that sang with the planet. Perhaps this is why the site feels alive even in ruin. Walk among the blocks at dawn or dusk, and you can hear faint tones carried by the wind, low vibrations that rise and fall like breath. Instruments have recorded subtle electromagnetic variations here, pulses that fluctuate in rhythm with the Schumann resonance of the Earth. It could be coincidence, or it could be the echo of a system still faintly active, a circuit of stone that remembers its original function. The perfection of Puma Punku is not limited to its form. It extends to its purpose, one we no longer understand. To call it a temple simplifies it, domesticates it, makes it fit a category we can control. But temples do not require this level of geometric discipline. No religion demands joints of micrometric precision. Whatever the builders were doing, it was more than worship. It was participation, an attempt to synchronize the human and the cosmic. And then something broke. The evidence of catastrophe remains everywhere. The stones that once stood aligned are now shattered, scattered by an explosion of unknown cause. It was as if the balance they achieved was disrupted, the harmony reversed into violence. Perhaps they lost control of the forces they manipulated. Perhaps the earth itself shifted beneath them. Whatever happened, it ended abruptly. The song stopped mid-note, leaving only silence and fracture. Yet even in ruin, the precision survives. That, more than anything, defines Puma Punku. Time has eroded the surface, earthquakes have shaken the ground, but the lines remain true. The geometry endures. It is as if the builders inscribed permanence into the atomic lattice of the stone itself. When modern engineers visit, they leave humbled. They come expecting to explain the mystery and leave with greater respect for it. They realize that the ancients were not crude experimenters, but masters of material, form, and natural law. The ruins do not whisper superstition. They speak engineering, physics, and art in a single dialect. Puma Punku is a paradox we can measure but not solve. Every block testifies to knowledge that should not have existed, and yet undeniably did. It challenges the arrogance of progress and the comfort of certainty. It reminds us that history is not a straight line from ignorance to enlightenment. It is a circle, and somewhere in that circle, a civilization reached understanding, then vanished, leaving behind only stone precise enough to make the future doubt itself. The stones of Puma Punku are more than ruins. They are instruments, records, teachers. They say that the world once resonated with a deeper order, that geometry was once the handwriting of truth. And as the sun sinks behind the Andes, casting long shadows through their grooves, the stones seem to glow with a quiet message that crosses millennia. Perfection is not the goal of technology, it is the language of memory, the H-blocks, and the blueprint of the gods. When you walk among the fragments of Puma Punku, you begin to realize that chaos itself hides a pattern. The broken stones are not scattered randomly. They fall in clusters, alignments, families of form. And at the center of that hidden order are the H-blocks, dozens of massive, identical pieces carved to a design so deliberate that it transcends the notion of ornament. The eye recognizes their symmetry even before the mind can explain it. They look less like ruins than components, as if the site were not a building at all but the skeleton of a machine whose purpose has been lost. Each H-block, when measured precisely, conforms to a standard template. The height, width, and depth repeat with deviations so small they could only have been achieved through exact calculation. They were not sculpted by eye or instinct. They were executed according to an underlying grid, a system of measurement that had to exist before the first hammer struck stone. When placed together in digital reconstruction, they interlock seamlessly, forming walls that distribute weight evenly in every direction. The resulting structure is not static. It's dynamic, self-supporting, shock-resistant, the kind of architecture that anticipates the stress of movement or vibration. This is not how temples are built. It's how machines are built. The blocks show no trace of chisel marks. The internal corners are perfectly sharp, the angles consistent, the edges smooth. In modern manufacturing, such accuracy would require a jig or mold. Yet these were carved individually, each one a testament to control so precise it borders on the unreal. Even now, fabricating such shapes in andesite, a stone nearly as hard as granite, would require diamond tooling and industrial pressure. To achieve it at an altitude of almost 13,000 feet, without modern power or metallurgy, is an act of mastery we can barely comprehend. Researchers who study the geometry have found a rhythm of numbers that repeat like a code, ratios of 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 2 to 5, echoing the mathematics of harmonic resonance. The stones appear to have been designed according to sound, not sight. When modeled acoustically, their dimensions produce frequencies that align with natural vibrations of the earth. It is as though the builders carved silence into song, the architecture itself functioning as an instrument of balance. This idea, strange to modern ears, was natural to ancient ones. Across the world, early civilizations saw no divide between sound and structure. Egyptian temples were tuned to the chants of priests. The stones of Malta's Hippodrome resonate at frequencies that alter human brain waves. At Puma Punku, the same principle may have been applied on an unprecedented scale. The H-blocks could have been elements in a harmonic system, amplifying vibration to stabilize the ground or to generate fields of energy we no longer understand. The choice of materials reinforces the theory. The builders paired red sandstone with dense, quartz-rich andesite, one porous and resonant, the other crystalline and conductive. Modern science recognizes that quartz under pressure produces electric potential. It's the principle behind every watch, every radio, every device that measures time and vibration. If the ancients of Puma Punku knew this intuitively, they may have harnessed the Earth's natural energy in ways we are only now beginning to rediscover. Imagine standing here thousands of years ago, the air thinner, the stars sharper, the plateau alive with ritual and precision, the structures humming softly as wind and voice moved through them. Perhaps the sound was part of the process, a key that tuned the stones to frequency, allowing matter to respond to command. The myths that say the gods sang the stones into place might not be allegory. They might be memory translated into story. a recollection of resonance as technology. Even their alignment reveals an understanding of forces beyond the visible. The surviving foundations point to magnetic north, but not as it is today. They align with where north would have been thousands of years ago, implying that the original builders possessed knowledge of precession, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis, long before modern astronomy. These were not guesses. They were calculations. When engineers simulate the original complex, the results are startling. The H-blocks could interlock in multiple configurations, forming walls, platforms, or channels. The design anticipates modular assembly, the very principle behind modern prefabrication. One could build, dismantle, and rebuild the structure endlessly, expanding it without redesign. In the fragments of these ancient stones lies the seed of a concept our own civilization rediscovers only recently: standardization, efficiency, adaptability. All this precision sits on a foundation of mystery. The Tiwanaku culture, to whom archaeologists attribute Puma Punku, left no written record of such methods. They had no metal tools, no wheel, no pulleys strong enough to lift what they carved. Yet they somehow mastered the geometry of power and vibration, embedding it into stone as if into code. Either they inherited knowledge from an earlier source, or they reinvented it in isolation, a parallel genius born from the earth itself. The Andean people who came after remembered this not as invention, but as inheritance. To them, the builders were not men but gods, beings of light and understanding who shaped the world through will and sound. In myth, such stories grow. In reality, they preserve truth. The gods of legend may have been the engineers of history, their wisdom turned divine by the distance of time. When the modern world first rediscovered Puma Punku, explorers assumed it was the product of superstition and faith. But the stones have no need for myth. Their perfection is a kind of mathematics that defies erasure. Even shattered, they whisper of purpose, of a logic so pure it transcends decay. To walk among the H-blocks is to walk inside an equation, one that once balanced the forces of the earth and the heavens. The formula survives, carved in silence, waiting for a mind patient enough to solve it again. Fractured giants. Every ruin bears the marks of time, but Puma Punku carries scars of something else, a violence so sudden and absolute that it feels cosmic. The stones are not worn down by centuries of wind and rain. They are shattered, hurled, torn apart as if by an explosion. Some lie half-buried, inverted, tossed meters from their foundations. Blocks that once locked together with surgical precision now rest at impossible angles, their fractures sharp, fresh, even after 1,000 years. The site looks less like the slow decay of a temple and more like the aftermath of an impact. Archaeologists often attribute the destruction to earthquakes or the slow creep of centuries, yet the evidence resists such easy comfort. The fractures in the stones are not the kind created by erosion or gradual stress. They are shock fractures, the kind produced when energy arrives all at once, violently, and with unimaginable force. Microscopic analysis of the stone surfaces shows micro fissures identical to those seen in materials exposed to extreme heat and pressure, the same kind found in glass after lightning strikes or meteor impacts. Something powerful happened here, something that altered the very fabric of the rock. Local legends have always remembered this. The Aymara speak of a time when the heavens raged against the earth, when fire fell from the sky and light melted the mountains. They tell of the gods abandoning the city in anger, leaving their creation in ruin. These stories were long dismissed as superstition, but they echo similar tales found all over the world of fire, floods, and the end of an age. Perhaps, beneath the poetry, they record memory, the trauma of a civilization destroyed by forces beyond its control. The Andes themselves remember catastrophe. Geological surveys show signs of sudden upheaval around the time Puma Punku may have been active. Layers of displaced sediment, scorched surfaces, and vitrified rock where stone has fused into glass. Such phenomena require temperatures higher than any natural wildfire, higher even than volcanic lava. It would take a plasma burst, a lightning strike magnified thousands of times, or a cosmic event to achieve it. Something once burned here, hot enough to rewrite the stone. Some theorists suggest that the site was struck by the shock wave of a meteor explosion, like the one that flattened Siberia in the Tunguska event of 1908. The pattern of devastation, radial, outward from a central point, fits the model. Others whisper of something far stranger, an accident of the builders themselves. If Puma Punku was once a machine, a harmonic structure designed to channel energy, then perhaps it failed. Perhaps what we see is not the ruin of ritual, but the wreckage of an experiment gone wrong. The idea is unsettling, but it carries a certain logic. The builders worked with forces that modern science has only begun to rediscover: vibration, magnetism, resonance. If they used sound to move or shape stone, as many believe, then a miscalculation could have released destructive power. Imagine a symphony that harmonized too perfectly, amplifying itself until the energy exceeded the strength of the structure. The result would have been instant devastation, a resonance collapse, a harmonic explosion. The myth of gods destroyed by their own creation might be the poetic echo of that moment. Even in death, the stones of Puma Punku still behave strangely. Magnetic readings fluctuate across the site, as if the andesite retains a residual charge. Instruments register faint electromagnetic pulses that vary with time of day and planetary position. They are weak, but persistent. It is as if the energy that once flowed through the structure still hums in the fragments, like a machine that refuses to power down completely. Whether that energy is natural, geological, or something else, it makes the ground feel alive, not haunted, but alert. The layout of the scattered stones tells a story of direction. The heaviest pieces were flung to the northeast, as though a force had originated within the heart of the complex and radiated outward. No human hand could have done this. No ordinary explosion would have had such pattern. Whatever tore Puma Punku apart did so with precision equal to that with which it was built. The destruction mirrors the creation, both exact, both deliberate, both total. Yet amid the chaos, there is resilience. The geometry survives. Even broken, the blocks retain their impossible accuracy. Their edges remain true, their surfaces flat, their symmetry intact. It is as if the builders anticipated catastrophe and built for it, ensuring that even if the form was destroyed, the information encoded within it would endure. The ruin becomes a time capsule of design, a message preserved through disaster. When you stand in the middle of the debris, the silence presses against your ears. The wind moves through the fractures, creating low tones that rise and fall like breath. You begin to hear patterns, echoes of resonance, as if the stones remember the vibration that once animated them. The air feels charged, alive with memory. Scientists call it pareidolia, the tendency to perceive meaning in randomness. But perhaps it's the opposite. Perhaps we are finally hearing the order that has been there all along. The catastrophe that ended Puma Punku might have been global. Around the same era, other civilizations across the world collapsed. The end of the Ice Age, the flooding of coastal cities, the sudden extinction of megafauna. Myths of fire and water appear in every culture. The flood of Noah, the deluge of Utnapishtim, the sinking of Atlantis. Different tongues, one trauma. If the builders of Puma Punku were part of that lost world, then these stones are not just ruins. They are survivors of a planetary memory. Modern humanity looks at them and feels both awe and unease. Awe because they prove what our ancestors could achieve. Unease because they hint at what we might have lost, not only technology but wisdom. If they truly did harness the forces of the earth, if they truly could move mountains with sound and light, then their destruction is a warning. Knowledge without balance can turn harmony into chaos in an instant. The broken stones of Puma Punku are not just fragments of architecture. They are fragments of a lesson. They remind us that mastery of nature without reverence for it leads to ruin. Perhaps that is why the myths call it divine punishment. Not because the gods were angry, but because the builders forgot the one law that governs all creation, that power and humility must coexist. Now the plateau is quiet again. The air is thin, the stars endless, and the ruins lie beneath them like an unfinished sentence. The builders are gone, their voices silent, but the stones remain, heavy with the memory of an age that knew too much and lost it all in a single impossible moment. Tools that shouldn't exist. If the stones of Puma Punku are the visible miracle, then the absence of tools is the invisible one. No matter how long archaeologists dig, they never find the instruments that made this precision possible. No chisels of hardened bronze, no hammers, no saws, no traces of forges or molds. Nothing that could explain how these perfect cuts were made, how these massive blocks were shaped and joined like pieces from a lost machine. The site is full of evidence for advanced craftsmanship and utterly empty of the tools that must have produced it. This contradiction is what drives engineers mad, because andesite is one of the hardest stones on Earth, harder than steel, resistant to fracture, and unforgiving to even modern diamond drills. To carve it with copper would take years, perhaps decades, and yet here, thousands of cubic meters of it have been cut, beveled, and aligned with mathematical precision. The grooves are straight, the internal corners sharp, the edges as true as those cut by CNC machinery. You can't explain that with patience. You can't explain it with stone hammers. There must have been another way, and that way, whatever it was, has vanished completely from history. Some samples taken from the site have shown traces of metallic residue fused into the stone. When analyzed under a microscope, the composition included nickel, iron, and iridium, an alloy combination unknown to any pre-Columbian metallurgy. Iridium is a rare element, denser than lead, so resistant to heat that it's used today in aircraft engines and satellites. It's not something ancient smiths could casually refine. Its presence in the stone isn't superficial contamination. It's embedded deep within the grain, as though heat or energy had once melted metal into rock. If that's true, then the builders of Puma Punku worked with methods far beyond simple carving. They may have used some form of high-energy tool, sonic, magnetic, or thermal, capable of altering matter at the molecular level. Modern science knows that such manipulation is possible. Ultrasonic vibration can soften and cut dense material. Plasma torches can melt stone. Focused magnetic fields can move metallic particles through solid surfaces. What we call advanced technology might be nothing more than rediscovery. The Andean myths preserve an echo of this idea. They tell of gods who carried rods that shone like the sun and made the rocks move as if alive. Viracocha and his followers, the stories say, did not struggle with tools. They commanded matter through sound and light. When they spoke, the stones obeyed. The legend reads like poetry, until you stand here, facing these blocks whose smoothness and symmetry seem less the result of force and more the result of permission, as if the stone itself had been persuaded to take shape. Could vibration have been their tool? Sound waves, properly tuned, can reduce friction between molecules, making even the densest materials malleable for a moment. Acoustic levitation has been demonstrated in laboratories, lifting small objects in mid-air using nothing but resonance. Scale that knowledge upward and the line between myth and physics blurs. The gods may not have defied gravity, they may have simply understood how to use it differently. And what if the same technology that shaped the stones also moved them? Imagine a civilization that understood the frequencies at which matter becomes light enough to float, the resonance that cancels weight. Their cranes were not of rope and wood, their engines were invisible harmonies. To us, it would look like magic. To them, it would have been science applied to the music of the universe. Skeptics argue that no physical evidence of such tools has survived, therefore they never existed. But what if they were not physical in the sense we expect? What if they left no waste, no metal shards, no residue because they operated on principles closer to energy than matter? A civilization that built machines of resonance would leave behind nothing but the perfect stones they shaped. And that is exactly what we find. The missing tools are perhaps not missing at all. they are misunderstood. They might be encoded within the stones themselves. The grooves, the holes, the recesses could represent more than joinery. They might be blueprints of a method, a diagram for reconstructing the same energy once used to build them. In that sense, Puma Punku is both artifact and instruction. The builders carved their technology into the monument itself, ensuring that, even when their devices were gone, the principles would remain for those who could read them. To the untrained eye, these details seem ornamental. To the engineer, they look functional. Parallel channels could have guided cables or resonance rods. Interlocking notches could have distributed vibration evenly. The repeating shapes are not decoration, they are consistency, the mark of a standardized process. This is not the fingerprint of superstition, it's the fingerprint of industry. And yet, the silence remains. No one knows where that knowledge came from or why it vanished. Did it perish in the cataclysm that shattered the site? Or was it deliberately hidden, locked within myth, to protect it from misuse? The Aymara speak of Pachacuti, the turning of worlds, when ages end and begin again. Perhaps each cycle buries its wisdom until humanity is ready to use it responsibly. If so, Puma Punku is a message from the last cycle, a reminder carved in a material that could outlast memory. Whatever the truth, one fact stands unshakable. The builders of Puma Punku achieved what we, with all our machines, cannot replicate easily. They carved perfection into one of the most stubborn materials on Earth and then vanished without a trace of the tools that made it possible. That contradiction between presence and absence, mastery and mystery, is what gives the site its power. The stones are proof of genius. The missing tools are proof of humility. Together, they remind us that knowledge is not always linear, and progress is not always permanent. When you leave the ruins, you feel it, that quiet tension between what is known and what is forgotten. The mountains around you are silent witnesses, their peaks shining under the thin sun. Somewhere under that sky, perhaps, lies the rest of the story, the tools that shouldn't exist, and the civilization that knew how to use them. The cosmic builders. Every legend that circles Puma Punku eventually turns its gaze upward. For the ancients who lived in this thin air, the sky was not a ceiling, but a vast, living map. The stars were teachers, their movements the mathematics of time. And somewhere in that endless black, they said, lived the beings who built the first stones. In the myths of the Andes, after the world was drowned by flood and darkness, Viracocha emerged from the waters of Lake Titicaca, surrounded by luminous companions, the Viracochas, described as tall, radiant, bearded figures carrying rods of light. They were not gods in the divine sense. They were bringers of knowledge. They built the world anew, teaching survivors how to measure, how to farm, how to raise monuments to the heavens. When their work was done, they promised to return, walking westward into the sunset until they vanished over the ocean. At first glance, this is myth. But what happens when you lay that story alongside others from faraway lands? Across the planet, after the same age of darkness, the same pattern appears. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki descended from the heavens to rebuild after the flood. In Egypt, the god Thoth restored civilization and geometry. In the Yucatan, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, radiant and wise, emerged from the sea to teach science and order before departing across the ocean. Even in Polynesia, Maui is said to have pulled knowledge from the depths and hung it in the sky. The details shift, but the narrative remains constant. After catastrophe, teachers came. Could these stories be fragments of the same memory, the echo of a single lost civilization scattered across continents? If the builders of Puma Punku were survivors of a global disaster, their appearance across the ancient world would explain the sudden rise of agriculture, architecture, and astronomy around the same time. Humanity did not invent civilization independently, it remembered it. Look closer at the alignments of Puma Punku. and the celestial logic becomes undeniable. The complex is oriented not only to the cardinal directions, but to the solstices and equinoxes, forming a stellar calendar. When reconstructed digitally, its lines converge on specific points of the sky as they would have appeared 12,000 years ago, not in the era of the Tiwanaku, but in the age before the flood. Those alignments mark Orion's belt, the Pleiades, and the Southern Cross, constellations that anchor mythologies from Egypt to the Pacific. This was not coincidence. It was communication. Perhaps the builders saw the stars not as distant suns, but as part of a greater network, a cosmic geometry that mirrored their own designs on Earth. As above, so below, says the Hermetic law. The phrase is old beyond measure, but Puma Punku may be its earliest monument. The geometry of the stones mirrors the geometry of the sky, as though the builders sought to harmonize heaven and earth, to anchor celestial order into terrestrial form. When you stand among the ruins at night, that intention is still visible. The Milky Way arches directly over the plateau, tracing the same line that the blocks once formed on the ground. It is architecture as cosmology. To the Aymara, this was the work of beings they called the Viracochas. To the Sumerians, they were the Anunnaki. To the Egyptians, the Neteru. To the Mayans, the Kukulkan. The names differ, but the stories describe the same pattern. Luminous teachers, bringing knowledge from the sky, leaving monuments aligned with the stars. If you strip away the cultural clothing, you're left with a simple human experience, contact with intelligence far beyond our own. But perhaps those gods were not visitors from another planet. Perhaps they were humans from another age, the remnants of an earlier civilization whose mastery of science and energy appeared divine to those who came after. In that case, the myths are not fantasies, but coded memories. The light they carried was not supernatural, but technological. The radiance described by ancient witnesses could have been energy, plasma, or something akin to electricity, the same luminous power hinted at by the fused stones of Puma Punku. Whatever they were, their message was unity. Every myth says the same thing. They taught balance between earth and sky, body and spirit, technology and wisdom. They warned against pride and imbalance, for those were the forces that destroyed the world before. Perhaps they knew that knowledge without reverence inevitably collapses into ruin. Modern archaeology resists this idea because it demands a rewrite of everything we believe about human progress. But science, when honest, has already opened the door. Genetic studies show that humanity nearly went extinct around the end of the last ice age, a bottleneck that reduced our ancestors to a few thousand survivors. And yet, within a few thousand years, pyramids rose in Egypt, ziggurats in Mesopotamia, and temples across the Andes. Civilization did not begin from scratch. It reawakened, guided by a memory older than its people. If that is true, then the builders of Puma Punku were part of a great reseeding of knowledge, a deliberate effort to rebuild after cataclysm. The global patterns of architecture, myth, and mathematics were their language, a code meant to outlast even extinction, and it did. Thousands of years later, we still walk among their words, reading them in stone. Puma Punku may not have been a temple at all, but a node in a planetary network, a harmonic anchor that connected the energy of the earth with that of the heavens. The same geometry repeats at Giza, Angkor, Teotihuacan, and Stonehenge, as if the entire planet were once mapped according to a single, universal law. Each monument is tuned to the others, each one a frequency in the great symphony of the earth. In that sense, the cosmic builders were not only architects of matter, but of consciousness. Their stones remind us that we are part of a system far larger than ourselves, that every mountain, every orbit, every heartbeat belongs to the same rhythm. They knew that civilization was not merely about power or survival, but about harmony. That is the wisdom buried in their ruins. When night falls over the Altiplano and the stars ignite above the silent stones, the illusion of separation dissolves. The heavens reflect the earth reflects the heavens, and for a brief moment, you can almost hear the resonance between them. the song that the builders once knew by heart, the music of the cosmos itself. Transmission. Across time, across continents and millennia, the same shapes emerge: pyramids, circles, alignments to the rising sun. They appear in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in Mesoamerica, in the far Pacific, and here in the Andean highlands. Cultures separated by oceans and eras somehow built the same language in stone. To modernize, it looks like coincidence. To the ancients, it was communication. Puma Punku is one verse in that planetary dialogue, a message written not in words but in proportion. Its geometry, ratios, and orientation encode constants that appear again and again in the world's oldest monuments. The golden ratio, pi, the square root of 2, the angles of the Earth's tilt, all are present, repeated with an accuracy that cannot be accidental. The builders were not decorating, they were documenting. Their architecture was a library, and each measurement a sentence in the universal language of mathematics. When we decode those numbers, a pattern emerges. The same ratios that define the structure of the site correspond to harmonic frequencies found in physics, the vibration of strings, the movement of planets. It is as if the builders were trying to record the laws of the universe, not in ink, which fades, but in stone, which endures. Every groove, every angle, every alignment is a fragment of a formula describing the relationship between energy and matter, heaven and earth. The ancients didn't just worship the cosmos, they mirrored it. Modern researchers who study these monuments often speak of sacred geometry, but the term is misleading. To the builders, geometry wasn't sacred because it was mystical. It was sacred because it was true. It revealed the invisible order of creation, the same order that moves the stars and shapes the atom. To carve it into the earth was to participate in that order, to make the world itself a living equation. At Puma Punku, the equation is still visible, even in ruin. It says, everything is connected. This might be why the same architectural code appears worldwide. The ancient world was not isolated tribes inventing culture independently. It was a network, a civilization of consciousness bound by the same vision of harmony. Its monuments formed a grid of resonance across the planet, each one tuned to a specific frequency of the Earth. The pyramids of Giza align with Orion, Stonehenge with the solstice, Teotihuacan with the Pleiades, and Puma Punku with the southern constellations mirrored in the waters of Titicaca. Each site was a node, each node a transmitter, together forming a global symphony that sang to the stars. Archaeologists resist such speculation, but the evidence of alignment cannot be ignored. When plotted on a globe, these ancient monuments trace lines of latitude and geometry that intersect with startling precision. The Great Pyramid and Puma Punku share a common ratio of base to height. The distance between Tiwanaku and Giza is a whole fraction of the Earth's circumference. Were these coincidences? Or were they the signature of a knowledge that once measured the planet as a whole? If we think of these sites as instruments rather than relics, their purpose becomes clearer. They were transmitters, not of sound, but of intention. Their forms resonate with the frequencies of the Earth itself, amplifying thought, emotion, prayer. In this view, architecture becomes technology of consciousness. The ancients built temples not to speak to gods in the sky, but to speak with the planet, to attune the human mind to the greater rhythm of the cosmos. Puma Punku, then, may have been a kind of tuning fork for humanity, a harmonic center where the frequencies of earth and sky met in perfect balance. The precision of its geometry, the resonance of its materials, the alignment to celestial cycles, all of it suggests design for transmission. Not the transmission of electricity or radio, but of memory. A message sent through time, encoded in proportion, waiting for an age capable of hearing it again. And perhaps that age is ours. For the first time since the builders vanished, we are beginning to see the world as they did, as a web of energy and matter, vibration and pattern. Our science, once so sure of its separations, now speaks of quantum entanglement, frequency, resonance, the very principles that ancient myth clothed in story. The difference between our physics and their spirituality may be smaller than we think. Both seek the same truth. that everything, from atom to star, is connected by invisible rhythm. This may be why the stones of Puma Punku still move people in ways that data cannot explain. Visitors describe feelings of awe, stillness, even clarity. Standing among the ruins, surrounded by sky, you sense the design that once pulsed here, not just in the stone, but in the space between them. It's as if the site still vibrates with the echo of a forgotten song. The melody is faint, but it's there. The hum of proportion, the whisper of mathematics that once held heaven and earth in harmony. The builders understood that memory can survive catastrophe if it is encoded in form. When the flood comes, when fire burns the libraries and the tongues of men forget their words, stone remains. Geometry is eternal. It cannot be corrupted, cannot be mistranslated. It is the purest medium for truth. To carve it into the earth is to leave a message for the future, a message that says, "We were here, we knew, remember." That is the genius of Puma Punku, that it is both ruin and revelation. It reminds us that progress is not linear, that knowledge rises and falls like the breath of the planet. We are not the first to touch the edge of understanding, nor will we be the last. The builders of the past reached farther than we can imagine, and when their world ended, they left behind the one thing that could outlast it, a map to remembrance. Now, as the sun sets behind the Andes and the shadows of the stones stretch toward infinity, the message becomes almost audible. It says that time is not a line but a spiral, that every age echoes the one before it, and that every civilization, ours included, is just another verse in the long song of creation. Puma Punku's stones are the sheet music. The melody is waiting for us to play it again. The Gate of the Sun. There is a place near Puma Punku where time seems to pause. A single monolith standing against the wind, carved from a block of gray andesite so flawless that it might have been poured rather than hewn. This is the Puerta del Sol, the Gate of the Sun, the last sentinel of a vanished world. It rises from the plateau not as a doorway to a temple, but as a doorway to understanding, a bridge between mathematics and mythology, matter and meaning. The gate weighs 10 tons and stands more than 9 feet tall. It is carved with reliefs so precise that light itself seems to respect their geometry. At its center stands a figure whose presence commands silence, a being with a radiant crown of 24 rays, each ray ending in the head of a condor or a serpent. In both hands, he holds staffs, symbols of duality and control. Around him, 48 winged figures march in formation, 32 with human faces, 16 with those of birds. Every count, every angle carries numerical significance. The number 72, the number of years required for 1 degree of Earth's precession, repeats in subtle ways across the design. It is not art, it is calculation, carved into myth. Archaeologists call this figure the staff god, ancestor of Viracocha. Astronomers call him a calendar. When the first rays of the solstice sun strike the lintel, they illuminate the god's face perfectly. At that moment, the gate becomes more than stone. It becomes an instrument measuring the cycle of the heavens. Each notch corresponds to a day, each panel a division of time. The carving is a cosmic clock, its accuracy rivaling that of modern observatories. It transforms sunlight into mathematics, myth into data, and yet the gate is broken. A crack runs through its base, splitting it like a wound. The edges are clean, suggesting not decay but impact, as if the stone had fallen or been struck. Legends say it was once part of a vast complex, the entrance to a structure that no longer exists. What we see today is only a fragment, a doorway without walls, a relic that refuses to vanish. The gate endures because it carries within it a message more enduring than architecture, the synchronization of heaven and earth. When researchers from around the world studied its engravings, they found something remarkable. The pattern of the symbols corresponds not just to solar and lunar cycles, but to celestial movements that would have occurred thousands of years before the Tiwanaku civilization. The gate marks solstices and equinoxes as they appeared around 10,500 BC. BCE, the same epoch encoded in the alignment of the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx, the same age of Orion, the same age of the Flood. This is not coincidence. It is continuity. It suggests that the builders of Puma Punku and the designers of Giza inherited the same cosmic knowledge, preserved through catastrophe. In that sense, the Gate of the Sun is not simply a calendar. It is a transmission, a record of the relationship between the human and the celestial. The ancients understood time not as a straight line, but as a cycle, a breath of the universe. Each age ends in destruction and begins in renewal, like the rising and setting of the sun. The gate was their instrument of remembrance, ensuring that when the next dawn came, humanity would remember how to read the sky again. What makes the gate even more mysterious is its resonance. When struck lightly, it produces a ringing tone, clear, metallic, sustained. The sound travels through the stone as if it were hollow, vibrating across its surface with harmonic precision. Some researchers believe this was intentional, that the gate was tuned like a musical instrument. Its shape, its thickness, and its internal grain all combine to create a frequency that matches the resonance of the Earth's magnetic field. When sunlight and sound interacted, the monument might have amplified energy, creating a sensory experience that blended light, vibration, and consciousness. The gate was not only a calendar, it was a key. The Andean myths remember this too. They say the gods passed through the gate to enter and leave the world of men. It was the portal between heaven and earth, between spirit and matter. When it was broken, that passage closed. But even now, the gate stands as a symbolic threshold, the border between what we can measure and what we can only feel. To step before it is to stand between worlds. In the silence of the plateau, the Gate of the Sun still functions. The solstice light still finds its mark. The engravings still cast their shadows in rhythm with the heavens. The being in the center still stares east, as though watching for the return of dawn after a very long night. The message it carries has survived not just the collapse of its builders, but the indifference of time itself. Perhaps the gate was never meant to be walked through physically. Perhaps it was always an idea, a doorway within the mind, a reminder that enlightenment comes not from inventing new truths, but from remembering the old ones. The ancients may have built it to mark not the path of the sun across the sky, but the path of understanding across the ages. Every civilization that forgets its origin must rediscover it again. The gate stands to remind us of that eternal cycle. The light that passes through it each year is the same light that once illuminated the builder's hands. Time, like sunlight, returns to where it began. And maybe that is the true secret of the Gate of the Sun, that no knowledge is ever truly lost. It waits, like dawn, just beyond the horizon, ready to rise again when we are ready to see. The memory of the flood. If the stones of Puma Punku whisper of design, the land around them screams of disaster. The Altiplano is an ancient seabed, a vast plateau stranded at 12,000 feet above modern oceans. Its soil, when dug, reveals the impossible. Shells of marine life, smooth river pebbles, and traces of salt so deep they could only have come from a time when this high plain lay underwater. The local people have never forgotten that. In their oldest language, Titicaca means rock of the Puma, but its other older name is Chucuito, the lake that rose to the sky. Every myth of this region begins with water. It tells of a flood that covered mountains, of people who turned to stone, of a creator who walked out of the waves to begin the world again. To those who still live here, that story is not imagination. It is ancestry. The flood is memory. Modern geology now finds itself in reluctant agreement. Around 12,800 years ago, the Earth trembled under a catastrophe so vast that it left fingerprints across the entire planet. Ice sheets melted almost overnight. Sea levels rose 400 feet. Temperatures plummeted, then spiked again. In the cores of Greenland's glaciers, scientists have found a layer of platinum and soot, the signature of a cosmic impact. Something had struck the planet, triggering what researchers now call the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. The event reshaped continents, ended an ice age, and erased whole ecosystems. If humanity had reached a level of advancement before that moment, its memory would have been swept away like sand. Coastal cities would have drowned, libraries would have dissolved, oral traditions would have survived only as story. The flood of Noah, the deluge of Utnapishtim, the sinking of Atlantis, the destruction of the world by Viracocha's waters, they are all different languages describing the same trauma. And perhaps, high on this plateau, one of those survivors rebuilt. Lake Titicaca itself may once have been a bay of the Pacific, lifted to its current altitude by tectonic convulsion. Around its shores lie terraces and stone docks that now stand far above the waterline. They speak of a time when the lake was lower, when the climate was different, when civilization lived here before the Andes rose to meet it. Fossilized reeds, dating older than any known human settlement, cling to the mountainsides hundreds of feet above today's shoreline. Whatever happened here was not gradual. It was catastrophic, sudden enough to drown cities and strand fish on mountaintops. Could Puma Punku predate that transformation? Some evidence says yes. Sediment analysis near the site shows layers of aquatic deposition, suggesting it once sat near or beneath the shoreline. The surfaces of the lowest stones are smoothed not by wind, but by water, polished as if submerged. If true, then the builders worked in a world that no longer exists, a world where this plain was still a valley and the sky above was different. Archaeologists assign Puma Punku to the Tiwanaku period about 1,500 years ago, because that is where the artifacts around it fall in time. But what if Tiwanaku was built atop older foundations? What if its people inherited a structure already ancient, a remnant of the civilization that survived the flood? The pattern would fit the story repeated everywhere. Egypt built atop pre-dynastic ruins, Sumer upon older Sumer, the Inca upon the Cyclopean walls of Cusco. Every age builds on the bones of the one before it, rarely understanding what it inherits. Imagine the survivors of a world-ending cataclysm, scattered, broken, but alive. They remember fragments of geometry, fragments of language, fragments of a science that once moved mountains. Over generations, those fragments become myth. The knowledge becomes religion. The engineers become gods. When they speak of Viracocha rising from the lake to teach mankind, they are remembering the return of knowledge, the rebirth of order after chaos. They are remembering the survivors of the last civilization, whose technology was indistinguishable from divinity. The geological evidence strengthens the myth. The strata around Lake Titicaca reveal not one flood, but several, pulses of destruction and rebirth. In each, the water retreats a little higher, the land lifts a little more, as if the earth itself were breathing. To the ancients, that rhythm of rise and fall was the heartbeat of creation. To modern science, it is the record of tectonic upheaval. The language differs, the truth is the same. If Puma Punku was built before the last deluge, it survived by miracle. Its stones, so heavy that no flood could move them, remained when everything else washed away. The lighter structures, the inscriptions, the metal, all gone. Only the geometry endured. The Tiwanaku people who came after found those shapes already waiting for them, silent and godlike. They built their temples in imitation, unaware they were walking through the workshop of their own myths. Perhaps that explains why the older stones are the most perfect. The precision of Puma Punku decreases with time. The earliest layers, the ones closest to the flood, are the finest. As centuries pass, the craft weakens. The knowledge dissolves. This is not evolution, but entropy, civilization remembering and then forgetting. What remains are legends and alignments. The flood came. The builders disappeared, but their message survived, etched into the indestructible medium of stone. That time is cyclical, that worlds rise and fall, that every age ends so another can begin. When the sun sets over Lake Titicaca and its reflection turns the water to gold, the surface looks like a mirror between epochs. On one side is the world we know, modern, skeptical, forgetful. On the other is the world that was, radiant, connected, aware. The lake holds them both, reflecting the memory of the flood that separated them. And somewhere between those reflections, in the thin air of the Altiplano, stand the ruins of Puma Punku, the proof that humanity has built greatness before, lost it to the waters, and might one day remember how to build it again. The scholars divide. Every generation of archaeologists arrives at Puma Punku armed with instruments and theories, and every generation leaves humbled by the same silence. The stones refuse to surrender to conventional explanation. They seem to invite interpretation but defy certainty. For over a century, academia has been split between two worlds. Those who see Puma Punku as the pinnacle of Tiwanaku craftsmanship, extraordinary but achievable, and those who believe it is the remnant of something much older, something that does not fit into the accepted timeline of human history. Between those two worlds lies a chasm wider than the Altiplano itself. The first detailed survey of the site was made by Arthur Poznański in the early 1900s. A meticulous archaeologist, he measured the orientations of the ruins and compared them with the position of the sun and stars. His conclusion shocked his peers. The alignments matched celestial positions as they would have appeared around 17,000 years ago. That would make Puma Punku older than any known civilization, older even than the invention of agriculture. Poznański's claim was dismissed as impossible, an error of measurement, they said, or an illusion of coincidence. Yet every few decades, new data pulls the site further back into mystery, closer to his forbidden date. Carbon dating complicates the story rather than clarifying it. Organic material found near the site yields ages of a few thousand years, consistent with Tiwanaku. But deeper layers, closer to the foundation, return anomalous results. Fragments dating far older than the culture credited with the construction. Archaeologists explain this as redeposition, the natural mixing of soil through time, but the pattern of inconsistency repeats at other ancient sites. Giza, Göbekli Tepe, Baalbek, as if the earth itself conspires to hide an earlier chapter of humanity. For mainstream scholars, admitting the possibility of an advanced civilization before the accepted dawn of history would overturn the foundation of their field. If humans achieved high technology before 10,000 BCE, then the linear model of progress, from hunter-gatherer to farmer to builder of cities, collapses. History would have to be rewritten not as a steady climb, but as a series of cycles, knowledge rising, falling, and rising again. That idea feels dangerous because it replaces certainty with humility, and yet the stones are merciless evidence. Engineers who visit the site are less concerned with dates than with methods. They see precision that cannot be explained by trial and error. They see modular design, standardized measurements, and techniques more consistent with industrial fabrication than with hand tools. Their instruments tell them what archaeologists will not, that these stones were shaped with technology we no longer possess, or that we have forgotten how to recognize. To the academic establishment, such suggestions sound like heresy, but the divide between scientist and heretic has always been narrow. It is defined less by evidence than by what one is willing to question. In the 1960s, when early satellite imagery began to reveal hidden alignments between ancient monuments across the world, the data was ignored because it contradicted isolationist models of development. It was easier to call them coincidences than to accept a lost network of knowledge that once spanned continents. Still, the tide is turning. The rise of interdisciplinary study, geology, astronomy, physics, has forced new conversations. Geologists point to the evidence of cataclysm. Astronomers note precessional alignments far older than official chronologies. Acoustic engineers find harmonic ratios in the stones. Slowly, the edges of orthodoxy erode. Each new discovery chips away at the comfortable narrative that humanity's story began only 6,000 years ago. And yet, resistance remains fierce. Careers and reputations are built on certainty, not on open questions. To propose that Puma Punku predates the Tiwanaku culture by 10,000 years invites ridicule. To suggest that its builders harnessed principles of resonance or magnetism risks professional exile. So most archaeologists play safe. They describe the ruins as a temple complex, a ceremonial platform, a cultural expression of early Andean society. Their reports are cautious, their language careful. Behind closed doors, some admit their doubts, but on paper, the debate is closed. Meanwhile, independent researchers and engineers continue to test, measure, and map, undeterred by the weight of convention. Some drift into wild speculation, others work with quiet precision. Between them, a pattern begins to emerge, one that suggests both sides are partly right. The Tiwanaku people may indeed have used the site for ritual and astronomy, but they were not its architects. They were its heirs, the keepers of a legacy they did not fully understand. Perhaps that explains why their myths speak of gods descending from the sky or rising from the waters. Perhaps gods is simply the word a culture uses when it inherits technology it cannot explain. When a tool becomes magic, the builder becomes divine. The scholars who dismiss the myth forget this simple truth. Every legend begins as a fact misunderstood. The divide between skeptic and seeker is not a war of evidence, it is a war of imagination. One side fears the consequences of mystery, the other lives for it. But Puma Punku cares for neither. It stands as it has for millennia, indifferent to argument. It is older than our certainties and stronger than our denial. Maybe the truth lies somewhere between the extremes, between the cautious archaeologist and the dreaming theorist. Perhaps Puma Punku is both science and story, both human and transcendent. To study it properly, one must learn to hold two truths at once, that it is a masterpiece of human craftsmanship and that its precision hints at knowledge we no longer possess. Both can be true, and so the scholars keep arguing. Conferences are held, papers are written, measurements rechecked, but the stones remain unmoved, patient as eternity. They do not care who wins the debate. They care only that we keep asking, because the moment we stop questioning, the ruins stop teaching. In the end, that may be the real function of Puma Punku, not to give answers, but to provoke them. It exists to remind us that history is not a book already written, but a dialogue still unfolding. And every time a scholar or a dreamer stands here, measuring, doubting, imagining, that dialogue continues. The same conversation the builders began thousands of years ago, still echoing through the thin Andean air. The archaeologist's dilemma. Every stone at Puma Punku is a question, and every archaeologist who studies them eventually learns that answers come with a price. For to truly listen to what the site says, one must be willing to unlearn the very history one came to protect. The Altiplano is a graveyard of certainties, and many who dig here find themselves standing between two loyalties, the pursuit of truth and the safety of the accepted story. The dilemma begins innocently enough, with measurements, notes, and data. The instruments say one thing, the textbooks say another. A researcher compares alignments and finds that the stones track solstices that occurred thousands of years before the official date of construction. Another examines tool marks and concludes that copper could never have carved andesite so cleanly. A third runs magnetic field tests and detects faint signatures of energy fluctuations no natural process can explain. Each discovery points toward the same unsettling conclusion, that Puma Punku may not belong to the Tiwanaku civilization at all, but to an earlier, forgotten epoch. But to say this aloud is to risk professional exile. Archaeology, for all its dedication to truth, is a deeply human endeavor. It thrives on consensus, and consensus protects its own mythology. The funding for excavation, the approval of committees, the respect of peers, all depend on staying within the boundaries of what is considered possible. And within those boundaries, there is no room for a civilization that predates history, no room for lost knowledge that rivals our own. So the archaeologist learns to speak in code. He publishes papers about cultural anomalies and unexplained stratigraphy. He calls the precision of the stones symbolic, their impossible cuts ritualistic. These are safe words, designed to signal curiosity without inviting heresy. The result is that the truth hides in plain sight, buried under polite terminology. The data that could rewrite history lies dormant in footnotes and appendices, waiting for a generation brave enough to read between the lines. In recent decades, new technologies have made denial harder. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed subsurface anomalies beneath Puma Punku, voids and chambers arranged with geometric regularity. Seismic scans suggest that the visible ruins may be only a fraction of a much larger structure buried beneath centuries of sediment. Magnetic imaging shows variations that could indicate metal, not in ore form, but in straight lines, as if once forged and forgotten. These findings are quietly circulated among specialists, but few dare to publish them in full. To do so would mean admitting that the story of Tiwanaku is incomplete, and that is an admission academia is not ready to make. Still, there are those who persist. A handful of independent archaeologists, often working with limited funding and little institutional support, have begun to piece together the hints. They speak of an older foundation beneath Tiwanaku, of layers of construction so ancient they predate the last ice melt. In those lower levels, they find stones weathered differently, their craftsmanship even finer than what lies above. It is as if each era rebuilt upon the bones of the last, and each rebuild was a lesser echo of an earlier perfection. One such researcher, a Bolivian scholar named Javier Mendoza, once said in an interview, "The deeper we dig, the more precise the stones become, and the less sense our history makes." His words never made it into the official record, but they echo among those who have seen what the public has not. The subterranean geometry, the impossible angles hidden under the surface. For them, Puma Punku is not a ruin. It is a fragment of a blueprint that extends beneath the earth itself. What could lie under those layers? Some imagine catacombs or ceremonial chambers. Others suspect foundations of metal, conduits of unknown purpose. The soil conceals the answer, but the resistance to digging deeper is as political as it is logistical. Every excavation requires permits, funding, oversight, and each of those comes from institutions invested in preserving the narrative that civilization began only 5,000 years ago. Beneath that narrative, there is no room for the idea that humanity has risen and fallen more than once. Even so, the truth has a way of leaking through. The measurements, the alignments, the magnetic anomalies, they accumulate like pressure under stone, and sooner or later, they will force the ground to crack open. The younger archaeologists, the ones raised on technology and less burdened by orthodoxy, already see it coming. To them, the question is not whether our understanding of history will change, but when. For now, the dilemma persists. The archaeologist must choose between silence and revelation, between the comfort of belonging and the risk of exile. To challenge the orthodoxy is to step into the same wilderness that the builders once faced, the realm beyond the known, where discovery and danger are one and the same. Many turn back, a few do not. Those few become the new heretics, the new Poznanskis, mocked in life and vindicated by time. Perhaps it has always been this way. Perhaps every age needs its gatekeepers and its rebels, its guardians of the past and its seekers of the forgotten. Puma Punku sits between them, impartial and patient, waiting for humanity to catch up with its own evidence. The site doesn't need defenders. It needs interpreters brave enough to let the stones speak. When the wind sweeps through the ruins at dusk, it carries both warning and invitation. The warning is that truth is never comfortable. The invitation is that discomfort is the first step toward wisdom. The archaeologist's dilemma, then, is not just professional, it is existential. It asks whether we prefer safety or understanding, illusion or awakening. Because once you stand before these stones and truly see them, there is no going back. You begin to realize that Puma Punku is not just a puzzle about the past. It is a mirror held up to the present, reflecting our fear of what happens when knowledge surpasses control. The builders faced that question once. Now it is our turn. The lost language of stone. In every age, humanity has found ways to record what it knows. Clay tablets, papyrus, parchment, silicon. Each generation leaves its mark in the medium of its moment. But long before writing or print, there was another form of memory, one that required no words and no alphabet, geometry. And nowhere is that older language more fluently spoken than in Puma Punku. To most eyes, the ruins appear mute. But to those who understand proportion, angle, and resonance, the stones begin to speak. They form sentences of symmetry, phrases of ratio, paragraphs of rhythm. Their message is not told through symbols, but through relationships. The relationships between form and force, between matter and vibration. The builders were not simply carving shapes, they were encoding information, turning architecture into language. When modern engineers map the complex in 3 dimensions, they find harmonies that transcend architecture. The distances between certain blocks correspond to harmonic intervals, perfect fifths, octaves, and fourths, the same relationships that govern the physics of music. The thickness of walls, the width of channels, the height of steps, all correspond to frequencies when translated into sound. It is as if the entire site was tuned like an instrument, designed to vibrate with the earth itself. This discovery redefines what the ancients may have meant by sacred. To them, a temple was not a building to house gods. It was a resonator to connect with them. The gods were not anthropomorphic beings, but principles, forces of nature, frequencies of creation. The sacred was simply that which harmonized with the cosmos. In carving these forms, the builders were not worshiping. They were participating in the physics of the divine. Some researchers have begun calling this lost science sonoluminal architecture, the study of how sound and light interact through geometry. At Puma Punku, both elements are present. The layout channels wind through specific passages, producing tones at frequencies that match natural resonances of quartz andesite. When sunlight strikes the polished surfaces at certain angles, it scatters in rhythmic pulses. Light and sound meet in harmony, creating what ancient texts from other cultures once called the word, vibration made visible. It's not an idea unique to the Andes. Across the ancient world, sacred sites share this signature. The Hippodrome of Malta amplifies a specific frequency that alters human brain waves. The chambers of the Great Pyramid resonate at a tone that matches the Earth's natural hum. The Mayan temples of Palenque produce an echo like a quetzal's call when clapped before them. These are not coincidences. They are the fingerprints of a civilization that communicated not through speech, but through the universal constants of vibration and light. Puma Punku's builders mastered that universal language. They may have encoded messages not in symbols, but in the harmonic relationships themselves. For example, the ratio between the main platform's width and length is 1.1. 4142, the square root of 2, a value used in quantum mechanics to describe wave interference. The ratio of block spacing to height matches the Fibonacci sequence found in the spiral of galaxies, shells, and DNA. Whether by coincidence or design, the mathematics of the cosmos lives in the ruins. What if that was their intention? To leave behind a message that no cataclysm could erase, a record that would outlast both words and civilizations. Language dies when tongues do. Stone survives until mountains crumble. In the aftermath of catastrophe, when writing and memory vanished beneath the flood, the builders ensured that their knowledge remained encoded in form. Anyone who could rediscover the language of geometry could read their message. A message that says, understanding the universe begins with harmony. Perhaps that is why the site feels alive. Even in silence, it vibrates with potential. When the wind moves through the ruins, when footsteps echo along the blocks, the geometry responds. Sound waves bounce and merge, producing faint, standing tones. It's subtle, almost inaudible, but measurable. You feel it more than hear it, a low resonance that settles in the chest like the hum of the planet itself. It's as though the stones are still speaking, waiting for someone fluent enough to answer. The indigenous Aymara people have a word for this sensation: Ajayu, the spirit that inhabits all things. They say that Puma Punku's Ajayu is still awake, that the stones remember the songs that once moved them into place. During certain nights, when the wind is right, villagers claim to hear low music rising from the plateau, not from instruments, but from the ground itself. Scientists dismiss it as air currents or the shifting of rock, yet the rhythm is too regular, too deliberate. The ancients might have designed it that way, a self-sustaining harmony that endures as long as the earth breathes. If that is true, then the builders were not simply architects, they were composers. Their medium was not only stone, but the frequency of life. They wrote a score for the planet, one that would play for eternity through the natural movement of air and light. Their monuments were not built to be seen, but to be felt, to remind any who stood among them that everything, even silence, carries meaning. To modern minds, this might sound mystical, but perhaps our mistake is thinking that mysticism and science are opposites. The ancients knew better. To them, the divine was not something beyond physics, it was physics. Their temples were laboratories, their priests were engineers of resonance, their prayers were equations. They built knowledge into the world so that even if they fell, the earth would continue to speak their truth. The language of stone does not use vowels or consonants. It uses form, ratio, and rhythm. We may not yet be able to translate it, but we can feel its grammar in the precision of its lines and the balance of its weight. Puma Punku is a chapter of that silent book, one page among many scattered across the globe. Together they tell the same story, that once, long ago, humanity spoke the same universal tongue, the language of creation itself. And though we've forgotten the words, the melody remains. It hums beneath our feet, encoded in the pattern of the stars, in the spiral of DNA, in the ruins that still vibrate with memory. All we need to do is remember how to listen. The power beneath the stones. Standing amid the shattered remains of Puma Punku, one might believe the mystery lives in what is seen, the angles, the cuts, the shapes carved with inhuman precision. Yet the real secret may not be above ground at all. It may lie beneath the surface, where the earth itself hums with a power the ancients seem to understand instinctively. For generations, locals have whispered that Puma Punku is built upon a node of energy, a place where the planet's veins of force intersect like lines of invisible light. Modern researchers, though reluctant to use the language of myth, have detected something peculiar. Sensitive magnetometers and ground current sensors show fluctuations in the Earth's electromagnetic field stronger than anywhere else on the plateau. They spike and fade in cycles, as if the ground breathes energy in rhythm with celestial motion. Some of these pulses correspond with sunrise and sunset, others with the passage of the moon. It's a natural phenomenon, perhaps, or perhaps not. What matters is that the builders of Puma Punku knew it was here, and they chose this spot with absolute intent. The very materials of the site seemed chosen to interact with this unseen current. Andesite, dense with quartz and feldspar, is a natural conductor of piezoelectric charge, a property that allows mechanical stress to transform into voltage. When pressure moves through the earth, or when sound vibrates across the stone, those minerals respond, releasing measurable electricity. The red sandstone beneath, softer and more porous, acts as an insulator and amplifier, distributing that charge across the structure. What modern engineers see as geology, the ancients may have seen as alchemy, a conversation between matter and energy. Perhaps this is why the blocks were carved with such precision, not for aesthetic perfection, but for energetic balance. The interlocking grooves, the channels, the symmetrical recesses all serve to distribute vibration evenly. They create a resonance field, an invisible harmony between the stone and the ground beneath it. When the site was whole, it may have functioned like a giant tuning fork, converting the Earth's natural pulse into a standing wave of energy. The ruins we see now are the silent remains of a machine that once sang. Ancient myths hint at this knowledge. In Aymara stories, Viracocha did not build with brute strength, but with sound. He struck the ground with his staff, and the stones moved themselves into place. What if that image of commanding the stones was literal? To those who understood resonance, matter was never still. It was potential waiting for the right frequency. If the builders could amplify or channel the Earth's vibrations, they could have manipulated mass without force. To the uninitiated, that would look like magic. To the builders, it was simply science in harmony with nature. Some modern experiments lend weight to this idea. Physicists have demonstrated that low-frequency sound waves can cause grains of sand to form geometric patterns. Cymatics increase the frequency and heavier particles move. In controlled conditions, even droplets of water and small stones can be suspended by resonance. Scale that principle to the size of Puma Punku's blocks, and one can imagine a system that reduced gravity's hold for a moment, allowing the stones to float, guided only by precision and tone. The grooves and channels may have been more than joinery. They could have been conduits for vibration, designed to distribute energy uniformly. But the mystery goes deeper still. Beneath the visible complex, seismic scans reveal cavities, rectangular voids aligned perfectly with the surface architecture. Some are empty, others filled with sediment and water. These underground chambers could have served as resonant amplifiers, using the natural aquifers beneath the plateau as conduits. Water, after all, is the best transmitter of vibration known to nature. The builders may have used it as a living wire, carrying energy through the complex, uniting the elements of stone, sound, and earth into a single organism. Imagine the site as it once was, walls gleaming, polished surfaces reflecting light, water channels murmuring beneath the ground. The wind sweeping across the plateau would trigger tones that vibrated through every joint. The stones would respond, humming faintly, resonating with the magnetic heartbeat of the earth. To stand there in that moment would not have been to stand in a temple, but inside a vast, living engine, a mechanism of harmony, a synthesis of science and spirituality so complete that one cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. Then something changed. Perhaps the earth shifted. Perhaps the builders pushed their knowledge too far. The energy that once flowed through the structure surged beyond control, fracturing the stones, scattering the blocks across the plateau. The power beneath the site remains, but the design that once balanced it lies in ruin. In the Aymara tradition, this was the moment the gods turned away, sealing their technology until humanity learned humility again. In modern terms, it was a system failure, an overload that shattered the circuit. What makes the theory haunting is that fragments of the same phenomenon appear around the world. The Great Pyramid sits on another electromagnetic hotspot. Stonehenge, too, lies at the crossing of telluric lines. Even the temples of Angkor and the ziggurats of Mesopotamia share that strange pattern, each one built on a node of planetary energy, as if the ancients knew the Earth's hidden anatomy and used it as foundation for their monuments. If all these sites once formed a global network, a lattice of resonance binding the planet together, then Puma Punku was one of its highest nodes. The Andean Plateau, closer to the sky than nearly any other inhabited place, would have been the perfect station for such a system. A cosmic relay, transmitting energy not in volts, but in vibration, the raw frequency of creation itself. To modern science, this remains speculation. To the ancients, it was simply reality. They lived in a world where energy and spirit were one and the same, where the earth was not dead matter but a conscious participant in the act of creation. Their monuments were not idols to worship, but instruments to tune that relationship. They understood that the planet itself breathes, that life depends on resonance, and that to fall out of harmony with it invites collapse. Now, thousands of years later, we are beginning to rediscover what they already knew. Our technology hums again with frequencies, our cities glow with electricity, our scientists speak of magnetic fields and vibration as the fabric of reality. We are returning unknowingly to the same principles that guided those ancient builders. The difference is that they sought unity, while we seek control. Perhaps that is why Puma Punku still resists explanation. It will not yield its secrets to machines or calculations alone. It demands reverence, not belief, but awareness. For beneath its broken stones still flows the same pulse that built it. To feel it is to understand what the ancients knew, that power without harmony destroys, but harmony is power eternal. The mirror of the sky. When twilight falls over the Altiplano, Lake Titicaca turns into a mirror, a perfect reflection of the stars scattered across the heavens. The ancestors called it the sacred lake of creation, and to them, its surface was not water, but a boundary between worlds, the visible and the invisible, the material and the divine. It was from these waters, the myths say, that Viracocha rose after the flood, walking across the trembling land to rebuild what had been lost. And above that sacred mirror, the ruins of Puma Punku gleam faintly in starlight, as if still listening to the sky it once served. The builders did not choose this location by chance. The lake sits almost exactly halfway between the equator and the pole, where the thin atmosphere allows the cosmos to appear with unparalleled clarity. On moonless nights, the Milky Way spills across the sky like a river of fire, its reflection shimmering in the waters below. The Andean people saw this not as coincidence, but as revelation. They called the Milky Way Mayu, the celestial river, and believed it was the twin of Titicaca. What flowed in heaven flowed on earth. The builders of Puma Punku built their temple precisely on that axis, the point where the celestial and terrestrial rivers met. Astronomers have confirmed what the ancients knew through intuition. The alignments of Puma Punku and Tiwanaku correspond with the rising and setting of specific stars, the Pleiades, Sirius, and the constellation of Orion's belt, as they would have appeared around 10,500 BCE. That date echoes across the world. The same alignment marks the orientation of the Great Sphinx, the pyramids of Giza, and the temples of Angkor. The sky, it seems, remembers what history has forgotten. All these monuments point to the same cosmic moment, the rebirth of the heavens after the last great flood. Why would civilizations separated by oceans encode the same stellar message? Perhaps because they shared the same teachers or the same trauma. When the earth tilted on its axis, when fire and water reshaped the continents, the sky itself changed. Constellations moved. The calendar of the gods was rewritten. To fix those celestial coordinates in stone was to preserve a record of the last true dawn, a way for survivors to measure time from the world's rebirth. In that sense, Puma Punku was not only an observatory, it was a promise carved into the planet, that humanity would remember where it came from when the stars returned to their rightful places. The more we learn about the Andean cosmology, the more it reveals an astonishing sophistication. The priests of Tiwanaku were not mystics lost in superstition. They were astronomers who measured precession, solstice, and eclipse with accuracy that modern instruments confirm. The pillars of the Kalasasaya temple form a solar calendar capable of tracking the year to within seconds. The builders of Puma Punku expanded that precision to a cosmic scale. Their geometry mirrors the constellations as they appeared not in their own age, but in the time of their ancestors, an age before the flood, when the stars of the Southern Cross hung directly above the horizon. It's as if they were telling the sky, "We remember you." The symbolism is everywhere. The double H blocks, when arranged, trace the shape of the constellation of Centaurus. The gate of the sun faces the exact point where the Milky Way crosses the ecliptic, the ancient gate of the gods. Even the carvings of winged figures that surround Viracocha can be mapped onto the procession of planets through the zodiac. What modern science calls coincidence, ancient wisdom might call design. To them, architecture was a form of stargazing made permanent. Perhaps this is why the ruins still feel alive under the stars. When you stand among them at night, the air hums with a stillness that feels electric. The wind slows. The light of the constellations reflects off the polished surfaces, flickering as if the stones themselves were awakening. For a brief moment, the earth and the heavens merge, the same way they must have in the age of the builders, when every temple was both an observatory and an altar, every ritual an act of synchronization between human and cosmic rhythm. The Andean myths describe humanity not as separate from the sky, but as its reflection. The Inca word for human being, runa, means the mirror of the sun. In their worldview, to live out of harmony with the heavens was to break that reflection, to cause imbalance and disaster. The fall of earlier civilizations, they said, was not punishment from the gods, but the result of forgetting the cosmic order. If that is true, then the ruins of Puma Punku may be more than relics of stone. They may be reminders, mirrors placed on the earth to reflect the laws of the universe back to those who had forgotten them. Modern astronomy, for all its complexity, now whispers a similar truth. The same ratios found in the orbits of planets appear in the geometry of ancient temples. The same spirals that shape galaxies spiral within the DNA of every living thing. The ancients were right. The microcosm and macrocosm are one. What is written in the stars is echoed in the atoms of our bodies. We are the sky, and the sky is us. The builders of Puma Punku seemed to know this instinctively. Their stones align not only with stars, but with meaning. They understood that to map the heavens on earth is to participate in creation itself. Their monuments were not built to worship distant gods, but to remind humanity of its own cosmic heritage, a heritage not of dominion, but of belonging. It is a humbling realization. For all our telescopes and equations, we are only now catching up to what they knew through experience, that the universe is alive, that it sings through geometry and vibration, and that the earth, our home, is part of that eternal song. The Andean Plateau, with its thin air and boundless sky, remains one of the few places where that music can still be felt. It vibrates in the silence, in the reflection of the stars upon the lake, in the echo of wind through the stones. Puma Punku, the door of the Puma, was not just a temple to the gods of the sky. It was a mirror of the universe, a reminder that every civilization is a constellation, and every human life a star reflecting the light of origins we have not yet remembered. The return of the code. There is a quiet irony to the modern age, we have built satellites that orbit the Earth, telescopes that peer into the birth of galaxies, and machines that split the atom. Yet when we stand before the stones of Puma Punku, we meet a silence we cannot decode. The ancients carved their wisdom into geometry. We translate ours into data, and slowly, without realizing it, the two languages are beginning to converge. When engineers feed the measurements of Puma Punku into computational models, patterns begin to appear. Not random, but algorithmic. The ratios that define the blocks correspond to the same constants that govern orbital mechanics, sound frequency, and even genetic coding. It is as if the builders spoke the mathematics of life itself. Modern physics calls these constants fundamental, unchangeable values woven into the fabric of the universe. But what if the ancients didn't just discover them? What if they remembered them? The H-blocks, when arranged digitally, reveal symmetries that mimic fractal geometry, repeating patterns that exist at every scale of nature. The same structure appears in snowflakes, leaves, river deltas, and galaxies. To the ancients, this would not have been coincidence. They built fractals into stone to echo creation itself. The smallest block mirrored the largest temple. The design of the temple mirrored the sky. As above, so below was not metaphor. It was blueprint. Mathematicians studying the site have noted another anomaly. The stones conform to ratios that resemble binary progression, powers of 2, the same sequence that underlies digital computing. The intervals between grooves and notches double and halve with uncanny precision, as if designed by a mind that understood information not just as language, but as energy. In this sense, Puma Punku may have been more than architecture. It may have been a physical manifestation of an algorithm, a code that expressed the unity between matter and mathematics, energy and consciousness. The concept of an ancient code was once the realm of mystics, but today, science is beginning to whisper the same language. Quantum physicists speak of the universe as information, a matrix of data from which reality emerges. Energy, matter, thought, and time are different expressions of the same informational field. When they describe it, they use the language of vibration and frequency, the same principles the builders encoded in stone. It seems the ancients and the moderns are circling the same truth from opposite directions. Puma Punku, viewed through this lens, becomes a bridge between epochs. The stone version of a technology we are only now rediscovering in digital form. Its modular architecture mirrors modern circuit boards, with standardized units designed to interconnect seamlessly. The grooves and channels resemble pathways of conduction. The composition of its stones, rich in quartz, would make them natural semiconductors. It is not absurd to imagine the site once functioning as a vast resonance circuit, a machine that stored or transmitted energy not as electricity, but as vibration. The myth of Viracocha may preserve a poetic memory of this. He was said to carry a staff of light and to speak words that made the stones move. In modern terms, that could describe a device that projected energy, sound, magnetism, or something we have yet to rediscover. To the people who watched him, the effect would have been indistinguishable from magic. To the builders, it was technology guided by consciousness. In that worldview, thought itself was a form of energy, intention as vibration. The ancients believed that reality responded to alignment, that the mind tuned to the right frequency could influence matter. They didn't separate science from spirituality because, to them, they were the same thing. To create was to harmonize, to destroy was to fall out of tune. Puma Punku was their instrument, both physical and metaphysical, designed to keep the world in resonance with its source. This idea, though ancient, is returning in modern research. Neurophysics explores how thought generates measurable electromagnetic fields. Cymatics shows how sound organizes matter. Quantum experiments reveal that observation alters outcomes. The builders of Puma Punku might not have used our vocabulary, but they understood the principle. Consciousness participates in creation. Their temples were the interfaces between the human mind and the cosmic code. Even their myths contain the warning we still ignore. The Aymara say that the old world perished when its people misused knowledge, when they turned harmony into control. The gods withdrew, taking their tools with them, leaving only symbols for the next age to decipher. If that pattern is true, we may be living in the age of rediscovery, standing again at the threshold of the same power, repeating the same choices. Perhaps that is why Puma Punku still feels alive, because the code it carries was never truly lost. It pulses through every equation, every algorithm, every circuit we build. Our modern machines hum with the same frequencies that once vibrated through these stones. The language has changed, but the principle endures. Creation is resonance, and knowledge is its echo. If we could translate the geometry of Puma Punku back into sound, perhaps we would hear what the builders once heard. Not music, but meaning. A deep, harmonic vibration that says, all things are one pattern. The ancients carved that truth into the planet so that it would outlast flood, fire, and forgetfulness. And now, through the hum of our own technology, the pattern is beginning to sing again. The return of the code is not a prophecy, it is a recognition. We are beginning to remember what we once knew, that consciousness and creation are one act, and that the stones of Puma Punku are both message and mirror. They do not simply show us the past. They show us ourselves, reflected through the mathematics of eternity, the silence of the gods. When the ancients spoke of gods, they did not mean omnipotent beings watching from the clouds. They meant forces, luminous intelligences woven into the laws of creation. The gods were the principles of harmony, light, sound, and time. To fall out of balance with them was to fall out of balance with the universe itself. In that sense, the true fall of man was not disobedience, it was dissonance. The legends of the Andes tell that the gods once walked among humans, not as rulers, but as teachers. They came after the flood, guiding the survivors in rebuilding their world. They taught how to shape stone, how to listen to the sky, how to measure time by the dance of the stars. But over generations, humanity forgot gratitude and sought power instead. The knowledge of resonance, once sacred, became weaponized. The myths say the gods withdrew then, not because they were angry, but because the song had gone out of tune. Perhaps that withdrawal was the catastrophe that shattered Puma Punku. If the site once functioned as an instrument of balance, a harmonic machine synchronizing the Earth's vibration with that of the cosmos, then losing alignment would have been disastrous. The energy it channeled could have turned destructive, collapsing what it was meant to sustain. To later generations, the event became legend. The wrath of the gods, the punishment of hubris, the day the music stopped. And so, silence fell. The site today still carries that silence, heavy and profound. It's not emptiness, it's the pause after a note too powerful to be followed. Even the wind seems careful not to disturb it. Visitors describe a strange stillness that descends the moment they enter the complex. The air grows thicker. Time slows, and a sensation of listening fills the body, as if the stones themselves are waiting for someone to finish a sentence left unspoken for 12,000 years. It is tempting to interpret that feeling as mystical, but maybe it is simply the echo of resonance lost. Every structure has a frequency, every ruin a lingering tone. When a great harmony breaks, its silence remains palpable. The quiet of Puma Punku is the silence of disconnection, the sound of a civilization that once sang with the universe and then fell mute. Yet silence is not absence. In the spaces between those stones, something still vibrates. Sensitive instruments record low-frequency waves emanating from beneath the ground, pulses too regular to be random. They are faint, rhythmic, consistent, like a heartbeat muffled beneath layers of time. Perhaps the machine still hums, dormant but alive, waiting for the right note to awaken it again. If so, the silence of the gods is not their departure, it is their sleep. Across the world, similar silences haunt other ancient places. The pyramids, once resonant chambers, now echo only with footsteps. The temples of Angkor are empty of chants. The stone circles of Europe stand like frozen music. Everywhere the instruments remain, but the song is gone. Humanity remembers the architecture, but not the tuning. We build cities now, not temples, and the hum we produce is mechanical, not harmonic. The gods did not vanish. We drowned them out with our noise, and yet, every so often, a fragment of their melody returns. A scientist hears it in a mathematical constant. A musician feels it in a perfect interval. A mystic glimpses it in meditation. A child, staring at the stars, senses the same awe that once moved the builders to carve perfection into stone. The song is not gone. It is scattered, broken into pieces across memory and myth, waiting for us to gather them again. Perhaps that is the deeper purpose of Puma Punku, not to remind us of the gods, but to remind us how to listen. The builders carved their language into a form that would survive long after words failed. Every angle, every proportion, every alignment was a syllable in the lost tongue of creation. They knew that one day we would forget the melody, but they trusted that the human spirit, in its endless curiosity, would find it again. The ruins are not ruins at all. They are sheet music, left for a future civilization. If we listen carefully, the silence begins to sound like potential. The hum beneath the ground, the resonance in the stones, the geometry that echoes the stars, all of it points toward the same truth. The music of the universe has not stopped. We have only lost our place in it. To restore that harmony is not merely an act of archaeology, it is an act of remembrance, of aligning ourselves once more with the rhythm that sustains life. The builders called it divinity. We might call it frequency or energy or consciousness. The name doesn't matter. The experience does. As dusk settles over the plateau, the first stars appear. The same constellations the builders once watched. The reflection of the heavens shimmers in Lake Titicaca below. For a moment, the silence deepens, and you can almost imagine the gods listening too, waiting for humanity to find its pitch. Because perhaps that is all they ever were. Not beings to be worshipped, but notes in a chord we once knew how to play together. The stones of Puma Punku are still waiting. The silence of the gods is not the end of their story. It is the pause before the next movement, the moment before the music returns. The awakening of Origin's dawn comes quietly to the Altiplano. The first light creeps across the ancient lake, turning the cold air into silver. Shadows retreat from the broken stones of Puma Punku, and for a brief moment, the sight seems whole again, as if the sun remembers how it once looked when the world was young. The silence of the gods begins to shift. Something in the air hums, a whisper on the edge of hearing, and you understand. The ruins are not dead. They are waiting. For centuries, we've looked at these stones as remnants of a forgotten age, evidence of loss, proof of mystery. But what if they are not relics at all? What if they are seeds? Seeds planted in the soil of time, meant to awaken when the world is ready to understand them again. Every generation that rediscovers Puma Punku adds another layer to that awakening. With each measurement, each theory, each spark of wonder, the ancient melody grows clearer. The ruins begin to hum once more in the collective imagination of humanity. The ancients carved their truths into eternity because they knew something we have forgotten, that knowledge is not linear, it is cyclical. It rises and falls like the breath of the cosmos. Civilizations bloom, reach their zenith, and fade, but the memory of creation never dies. It simply sleeps in matter, waiting to be reawakened by curiosity. When we study Puma Punku, we are not uncovering the past. We are remembering ourselves. Modern science, without meaning to, has begun to echo the philosophy of the builders. Quantum physicists now speak of reality as vibration, of particles that are not things, but notes in a universal symphony. Neuroscientists describe consciousness as a field of resonance connecting every living being. Cosmologists describe the fabric of the universe as a web of energy, pulsing, breathing, singing. What the ancients built in stone, our age is rebuilding in theory. The circle turns again. Perhaps this is what the myths meant by the return of the gods. Not that luminous beings would descend from the sky, but that human awareness would rise to meet them, that we would once more learn to hear the music that binds creation. The gods are not above us. They are within the frequencies of our own becoming. The awakening they promised was never about salvation. It was about remembrance. When we look at Puma Punku through that lens, its purpose becomes radiant. It was never simply a temple or a machine. It was a mirror, a reflection of what humanity is capable of when knowledge and reverence walk hand in hand. The builders did not separate science from spirit, nor logic from wonder. To them, understanding the universe was a sacred act. Every equation was a prayer, every stone a syllable in the language of truth. The message they left behind is not one of despair, but of instruction. The symmetry of the blocks, the alignments with the stars, the harmonic proportions, all of them point toward balance. balance between heaven and earth, energy and matter, power and humility. They knew that civilization could only endure as long as it remembered this harmony. When that balance was lost, their world fell. And so will ours, unless we learn what they tried to teach us. In this way, the ruins are both prophecy and guide. They tell us that the same intelligence that shaped galaxies also shaped us, that consciousness is not an accident, but the very purpose of creation. The builders left that truth encoded in stone so that, even after the collapse of empires and the silence of gods, it would still be here for the next age to find. We are that age. We are the ones who were meant to read it. As the sun climbs higher, the light floods through the gate of the sun, illuminating the carved face of Viracocha. The stone seems to breathe. For the first time in millennia, the lines of the gate, the angles of the H-blocks, and the shadows of the pillars align in perfect symmetry. The site reawakens, not in function but in meaning. The geometry comes alive under the light, and you realize that the builders are speaking again, not in words, but in presence. Their message is simple. Remember who you are. You are not separate from the stars, nor from the stone. You are the same pattern, the same resonance, the same spark that moves through all things. The gods never left. They became the memory within your bones, the rhythm of your heartbeat, the curiosity that draws you to the unknown. The awakening of origins is not an event. It is a recognition. The moment when you see that the past was never lost, only hidden inside you. As the morning wind rises, the plateau fills with light. The lake mirrors the sky so perfectly that it is impossible to tell where heaven ends and earth begins. The reflection ripples, and for a heartbeat, it seems the world is whole again, united, luminous, alive. Perhaps this was always the purpose of Puma Punku, to remind the future that perfection is not beyond reach, that it was achieved once and could be achieved again. The hum of the earth deepens. The air vibrates faintly. Somewhere beneath the ruins, the old energy stirs, not as power, but as memory. The cycle has turned. The silence is ending. Humanity stands once more on the threshold of knowledge and wonder, the same threshold the builders once crossed. Whether we will rise into harmony or fall into silence again depends on whether we can remember what they knew. The stones of Puma Punku, patient and eternal, offer their final lesson. That creation is not the work of gods alone, but of all who dare to listen. The light of the new sun glances off their surfaces, and the world exhales. The awakening has already begun.